Hello learners, I am Dr. Arun Kumar, faculty member, School of Management, Shastra Deemed University. In this course, Research Methodology for Business Research, I am going to talk about the process of business research. So this is the framework of the business research process. So there are different elements involved in the process of business research. To start with, the first step here is observation in an organizational context. As a manager, in order to identify the problem area, he has to do a kind of observation, broad problem area. He has to identify it pertaining to the problem issue. Then he has to, go for collecting preliminary data pertaining to the identified problem. Then he have to precisely define the problem. Then once he does, collection of information associated with the concerned departments, concerned stakeholders, he has to arrive at the theoretical framework. It means that you need to go for the variable identifications. And next one is once you are very much clear about the theoretical framework pertaining to this problem area, you need to generate an hypothesis and followed by formulating the research design and collecting the relevant data collection and analyze the data and interpret the data. And once you did that and make sure that this data and interpreted data and the findings out of which will try to answer the research question, that's very important as far as the researcher is concerned. Next one is followed by report writing and proper presentation of the report in a structured manner. And finally, we have, as a manager, we will go for the decision-making process. So let's go further and let me explain all this element in detail. So what is the broad problem area? So the broad problem area refers to the entire situations where one sees the possible need for research and problem solving. Such issues might be related to what are the current problem currently facing an organization setting that need to be resolved. So the manager's prime job is to identify the broad problem area. For example, there is kind of employee turnover is observed in an organization. It means that something is going wrong. So he has to identify what are the factors associated with employee turnover. So employee turnover seems to be the broad problem area, and he need to scrutinize the relevant factors associated with that problem area. Next component here is in the process of identification of the broad problem area, that managers needs to be improved in the organization. It means that the areas that a manager believes needs to be improved in the organization. So in that context, a conceptual or a theoretical issues that need to be tightened up for the basic researcher to understand certain phenomena. And we will also discuss those components in detail in the oncoming sessions. And some research questions that a basic researcher wants to answer empirically. So let me, through this particular example, let me explain the broad problem in an organization that could be observed at the workplace. Let me quote a few problems areas pertaining to an organizational context. The training programs are perhaps not as effective as anticipated. This is one broad problem area. Sometimes what happens in marketing, or the sales volume of a product is not picking up. So as the marketing manager job is to identify those factors which is not enhancing or improving the sales volume of your particular product or services. Next one is the context of inventory management. We have a lot of costs associated with inventory is getting wasted. So inventory control is not effective. That's the major problem in relations to inventory management. And sometimes what happens, some members in an organization not advancing in their careers, so that the company is not progressing towards the future. So that may be a broad problem area as a HR manager may identify in an organization context. These are some of the examples I would like to quote in relations to the broad problem area. And also there is one more example, like the introduction of flexible work hours has created more problems it has solved in many companies, right? So whether it is effective or not effective, that has to be identified, and the exact precise solution has to be given to an organization which will resolve the problem area. Through this example, I can talk about the business problem, how it is translated into problem statement. So before that, let me talk about the problem. So let me read out, I have a context here. Frequent and long delays may translate into much frustration among airline passengers, to switching behavior, and to negative word of mouth communication. These feelings and behavior eventually have negative effects on the performance and profitability of the firm. So this is the problem associated with an airline company. So as the airline manager would like to formulate the research objective related to this problem. So the purpose of this study is twofold. One is to identify the factors that influence the passengers' waiting experience, and also to investigate the possible impact of waiting on customer satisfaction and service evaluation. And in relation to this research objective, in order to expand the research, and we need to pose specific research questions. So what are the factors that affect the perceived waiting experience of an airline passengers, and to what extent do these factors affect the perception of waiting time? So I think that will address the research objective, whatever we have formulated in order to resolve this broad problem. So a next research question here is, what are the effective consequences of waiting, and how does mediate the relationship between waiting and service evaluation? This is the next research question in relation to the research objective of that problem area in an airline business. And how do situational variables such as filled-in time influence customer reactions to the waiting experience? That's the next research question. So once you address these three research questions, naturally what happens, you get a solution for your research objective that naturally answer the give you a solution for this particular problem, whatever you as an airline manager have formulated. And the next one is, in order to, once you identify the problem, you need to know, what are the associated factors which is really affecting the problem area, broad problem area. In order to understand those factors, as a manager, research manager, need to collect some kind of preliminary data pertaining to that particular problem. So the nature of the data to be gathered, to be classified under three headings. One is the background information of the organization, I mean the contextual factors. For in case of this airline business, the contextual factors or the ticketing agents' performance, and also the operational staff performance, all that matters. So we need to collect some relevant information on those background information pertaining to that particular problem, and also you need to collect information pertaining to the prevailing knowledge on that chosen specific topic. That is the relevant findings from previous research. That's what we do, some kind of review of literature that we I think I will be giving more information on how to do the review of collection of information. I mean the secondary data information, apart from collecting the primary data. Primary data is nothing but the fresh data what we collect, and the secondary data already collected data like reports, some kind of statistical reports, collecting information from kind of journals, articles, magazines, and also from theses, and from industry reports like that. We may collect. We supposed to collect information as part of the secondary data in order to substantiate and strengthen an evidence for building up the conceptual framework. I mean the research, developing a research framework. So in the process of preliminary data collection, the background details of the company can be obtained from available published records. I think you can collect from the this kind of website. See, in the process of preliminary data collection, I think the background details of the company can be obtained from available published records, the website of the company, the company policies, document, procedures. You have a lot of SOP documents that you can review it, and also rules can be obtained from the organization records and documents. Data gathered through such existing sources are called secondary data, because the data is already collected by the persons involved in the earlier research process. Next one, talking about the secondary data or data that already exist and do not have to be collected by the researcher. Some secondary sources of data are statistical publication, bulletins, government publications, information published or unpublished and outside the organization library records, data available from previous research, online data, and also, as I said earlier, you can collect from the website of the airline company, and also the internet sources become the data already collected, which is considered to be the secondary data. And also the other types of informations, very specifically the perception and attitudes of the employees. In case of airline business, you need to collect the perception of the employees as well as the customers, or best obtained by talking to them, by observing events, peoples and objects, or also by administering questionnaires to individuals. So through that you can collect very specific contemporary data, current data you can collect, so that gives you a great information pertaining to that problem. Such data gathered for the research from the actual site of occurrence of events are called primary data. This primary data and secondary data will definitely help you to build your research framework or conceptual framework. So in the context of prevailing knowledge on the topic, as a researcher, in order to substantiate the problem area, he has to go for a literature review process. That itself, it says that you are reviewing the past literature pertaining to this research, so that it should help the researcher to identify and highlight the important variables that are related to the problem. So as a researcher, in order to get fundamental clarity and in order to explore the identified associated factors pertaining to the problem, as a literature review is a great significant process as a researcher has to undergo. And in the process of doing literature survey is nothing but a documentation of comprehensive review of the published and unpublished work from secondary sources of data in the areas of specific interest to the researcher. And I think this literature review can be done through synthesizing of articles, magazines, and textbook informations, and through that. So I think in order to collect background information, in order to explore what are the possible reasons for the problem area, I think the process of literature survey will be very much helpful for the researcher. And as I already repeatedly I was mentioning about what are the possible sources for collecting the data. You can also review the concepts pertaining to the problem, the textbook, and you have academic and professional journals, and also you have a thesis, PhD thesis and master thesis are available, and also conference proceedings, unpublished manuscripts and reports, newspaper, internet, and there are many other reports which is very much available. So now let's go in detail about defining the problem statement. After the literature review, the researcher is in position to narrow down the problem from its original broad base and define the issue of concern more clearly. So you get an idea. After synthesizing the literature review, you try to identify the factors and the relevant variables associated with that particular problem area, so that he can find more clarity in building a related research framework for that particular problem. So in defining the problem statement, we need to understand what makes a good problem statement before we define the problem statement. The problem statement introduces the key problem that is addressed in the research project. Problem statement is a clear, precise, and short statement of the specific issues that the researcher wishes to investigate. So there are three criteria for problem statement. These three criteria are called, it's stated here. It should be relevant, it should be feasible, it should be interesting. So if your problem statement, we all know that a problem statement is a very because we in a broad problem area we have not specifically narrowed down the problem. So what happened in the process of problem statement, we are trying to confine the specific issues related to the problem area, that we call it as a problem statement. And the problem statement comprises of the research question and research objective that is going to really address the problem area. So whenever you develop your problem statement, these three important criteria has to be keep in mind. That is relevant, it should be feasible, it should be interesting. So from an academic perspective, research is relevant if nothing is known about the topic, much is known about the topic, but the knowledge is scattered. Much research on the topic is available, but the results are contradictory. And also established relationship do not hold in certain situations. In that context, you need to really be very careful in developing a problem statement. So when a problem statement is very feasible, that we need to really scrutinize. If you are able to answer the problem statement within the restriction of the research project, that is always good. These restrictions are possibly related to the time and money, and also the expertise of the researcher. So a problem statement may be too difficult to answer. If you are really, trying to address within this confined requirements, then you can very well, write your problem statement. Hence, it is very important that you develop a narrowly defined question pertaining to the problem area that can be investigated with the reasonably with the time and also the efforts in terms of money, cost, and other factors, so that you can very well develop a relevant and precise problem statement. And also, you have to keep in mind a problem statement is should be very interesting, because research is a time-consuming process. We all know that, and you will go through many ups and downs before you present a final version of your research report. Because a lot of intricate matters are involved, and as a researcher you need to go through the entire process of research. In that, it is therefore vital that you are interested in the problem statement that you are trying to answer, so you can stay motivated throughout the entire process. If you are not having your problem statement quite interesting, and you lose interest. So that's why I always choose a problem statement and problem area, and you have the interest in addressing that problem. So next one, let's talk about the examples of the broad problem areas that a manager could observe at the workplace. I think I already have mentioned about these examples of problem areas that a manager could address in the organizational context. As I said earlier, training programs are not as effective as anticipated. The sales volume of the product is not picking up. Minority group members are not advancing in their careers. The newly installed information is not being used by the manager for whom it was primarily designed. The introduction of the flexible work hours has created more problems than it has solved in many companies. Okay, so these are the examples I would like to quote in this session, so that gives you a better clarity about what are the possible problem areas in an organization. And we can, this functionally, each functions of an organization has many problems. We were mentioning about sales is not picking up, that is pertaining to the marketing department. And also when you talk about employees are not motivated, that pertaining to human resource department. And if you got a problem with your inventory management, that is something to do with your production and logistics department. And like that, there are many instances and problems associated with the different functional areas of the organization, that you have to be carefully identify which functional area it is associated. And definitely in the process of exploring the factors associated with that particular problem, you need to also seek the association of other departments' help. Okay. Next one, we all know that a well-defined problem is fully solved. To what extent do the structure of the organization and the type of the information system installed account for the variance in the perceived effectiveness of managerial decision making? So this is the research question we need to pose pertaining to the problem area. And the next one is, to what extent has the new advertising campaign been successful in creating the high quality customer-centric corporate image that it was intended to produce? And how has the new packaging affected the sales of the product? These are the possible research question as a researcher can develop in order to address the problem area what we have discussed earlier, and also what are the effects of downsizing on the long range growth patterns of the company. Like that, there are many more research questions we can formulate pertaining to the problem area what we have discussed earlier. So, and in the process of the research, once you are completed through with, let me show you this framework here. So we have this framework. So when you talk about this framework, you can see here observation of broad problem area. So we collect preliminary data in which primary and secondary data is very much helpful in formulating the problem definition. I mean, developing the problem statement. And next step we need to understand, we have developed the exploration of the literature review, as well as we have collected primary data pertaining to the problem area, and through that we also reviewed many research findings, literature, whereby we identify the variables and associated factors. Once you are completed through with that process, then what happens? We need to go for a process called theoretical framework is very important. So whatever the concepts related to the addressing that problem statement, I mean problem area, you need to review those concepts very carefully. So basically, a theoretical framework is nothing but the collection of interrelated concepts like a theory, but not necessarily so well worked out. A theoretical framework guides your research, determining what things you will measure and what statistical relationship you will look for. For example, there are two factors. One is job freedom and salary leads to job satisfaction, and also motivation, organizational, employee commitment. Like that, we have many concepts, the factors which will lead to job satisfaction. And I can quote one more example in a marketing perspective. For example, if you want to really increase service loyalty, first one, you need to increase your, review the concept of, service quality. So you need to identify all the factors associated with service quality. Then you need to explore all the concepts related with service. Once the service loyalty is fine, then you move on to the next concept called service satisfaction. So you need to explore what are the factors associated with the service satisfaction. And once the service satisfaction is well addressed, then naturally it leads to what? Enhancing the level of service loyalty. So this is the framework, theoretical framework in addressing in the issue of enhancing the quality of the service loyalty improvement among the customers. So that's the example from a marketing perspective. And next and the next step here in the process of research is to generation of research hypothesis. Once you have developed the concept like what we have here, so you can see job freedom and job satisfaction. So you try to develop here, you try to relate these two concepts, whether job freedom will lead to job satisfaction or not. Test this through proposition and hypothesis. And similarly, an increase in salary will lead to job satisfaction or not. Try to test the hypothesis. That's what hypothesis generation, testing the related concept is very much important in the process of research. So problem statement become research hypothesis when constructs or operationalized. It means that service quality has many variables, many dimensions. So we are like in terms of service quality, we have an eminent researcher, we call it as Parasuraman, Zeithaml, and Berry. In the year 1988, they have operationalized a construct which 5 dimensions and 22 variables. A construct is a comprehensive instrument which measures which tries to measure the concept of service quality, and it is has been tested in various industry and validated, and the reliability is perfect. Then they standardize that to use in research. So in the process of research hypothesis, you have an initial idea, isn't it, about the problem. You have an often vague and general idea, and you do an initial observation pertaining to that problem. And next, you try to, in order to address the problem, whatever the relevant secondary data available, you are trying to explore those data through your existing research literature. And finally, what happens once you understand after the synthesis process, what are the possible variables and factors associated with those research problem, you try to develop a statement of the problem. Once you develop the statement of the problem with the appropriate research objective and research question, you are trying to operationalize the definition of the construct. I already said a construct comprises of many factors, the dimensions, and also variables associated with each factors. So as I said, in case of this construct of service quality, there is one factor called convenience. So suppose we are trying to administer this questionnaire, this construct to banking. So under the dimension of convenience, we may put the variable as whether the bank is opened on Saturday and Sunday also, and what about the working hours, long working hours. So this and the availability of number of ATM counters and the intensive distribution of branches, all these are the variables has to be addressed under the dimension of convenience when you do a research on banking, about service quality of banking. So that process we call it as operational definition of the construct. And finally, you try to connect two factors. For example, convenience and empathy. Do convenience and empathy has the relationship or not? Whether the convenience and reliability convenience factor and reliability, do they have an association in enhancing the service quality or not? Or do convenience and in terms of loyalty, do they have any kind of relationship or not? Like that, we need to really test these factors of that particular construct so that we can prove whether our claim of our hypothesis is true or not through the statistical test. Okay. Next one is the next process of the research is that the research design. A research design is nothing but the master plan specifying the methods and procedure for collecting and analyzing the data. So the research design involves a series of rational decision-making choices depending upon the various options available to the researcher. Broadly, it is composed of different elements like the purpose of the study, the unit of analysis, time dimension, mode of observation, sampling, design, observation tools, data processing, and data analysis. So the research design will give you a kind of a blueprint. For example, if you are going for a descriptive type of research design or explorative type of research design, there are many more types of research design available for research. And in that case, we need to really define the elements of the blueprint of your research. One is you start with who is the population of the study, who are the sample, who are the target audience, and how you are going to develop your research instrument, what are the hypotheses involved, and what is the sample frame, what is your sample size, and what is your sampling technique, whether it is probability sampling or non-probability sampling. And in probability sampling, you have sampling techniques are available. Are you going for a stratified sampling or a random sampling? Like that, there are many more. I think in this course, we have like that, the instrument and the statistical tools, like whether are you going for what kind of specific tools you are going to analyze, and are you going to use chi-square or ANOVA or multiple regression or correlation or factor analysis? What are the specific tools, and the appropriate statistical tool is addressing the issues pertaining to the problem area has to be used, and all these elements comprises of the research design. And also in research design, you can also mention about what is the we call it as what kind of software, I mean statistical package software are you using. That also you can use in order to deliberate the research design. And the next process, we call it as the data analysis. And the purpose of data analysis is to bring order to the data, because the data is very much scattered. So you need to bring order to the data so that it gives you clarity during your presentation, and it helps you to make effective decision making. So when you talk about the characteristics of the quality data, thick, rich description, voluminous, unorganized, data, qualitative data is available. That has to be given structure. So you have to put them back in order. It is a task of data analysis, and also perspective on analysis and interpretation. No single way to gain understanding of the phenomena. There are many ways, as long it gives you clarity of your presentation. There are numerous ways to report data that has to be taken care. And in the future sessions, we'll go in detail on all those aspects. When you talk about the next step in data analysis and interpretation, there are two kinds of data. One is quantitative data and qualitative data. So quantitative data have been collected, statistically analyzed, since it is numerically having a numerical value, and it helps to measure the degree of change that has been taking place, and also it allows an assessment to be made about the consistency of the data. So in case of qualitative data, the interpretation is very much difficult, because each respondent will come out with different perspective and give different responses. So in order to make it generalize their statements, it's very difficult in case of qualitative data. Here it is important to group similar responses into specific categories, group them, and identify the common patterns in the responses of the the respondent responses that can be helped to derive meaning from what may seem unrelated, and it will diffuse responses. And in case of this is particularly important when we are trying to assess the outcome of focus groups and interviews. So if you look at this cycle, okay, so first one is we collect the data, and we collect, check, and compile available data and gives feedback, and the data become information, and we try to analyze and interpret using statistics. You get the relevant amount of knowledge when you analyze the data, and we try to summarize the findings, and we do policy briefs, and which helps the manager to make decision making, and definitely enhance the capacity for data collection and analysis and use for the purpose of decision making. So then the next step in the research process is the structure of the formal report, and we have discussed only the main elements here. That is, a report will have the title page, a letter of transmittal, who are involved, you need to acknowledge, and what are the elements involved, and the table of contents, what are the contents, the research report, and a summary, executive summary, or sometimes we call it as an abstract, which gives you entire compilation of a brief stuff has been put in one page of all the chapters of your research report. And normally a research report will have an introduction, and also you have a methodology, you will have a discussion of findings, and finally you have a conclusion and recommendation. And in the finally you have your references, whatever the sources you have referred, articles referred. I think you can you'll be using to cite those sources through using American Psychological Association formatting procedure, and the questionnaire and the relevant reports can be put in place along with the report in the appendix section. So after understanding the structure of the formal report, and when you talk about in the introduction section, we have to describe the broad problem area, and you need to describe the research objective, the research question and the relevant hypothesis. You need to discuss about the conceptual framework or the research model. You need to define the key variables and what is the research gap in the research, and also you need to depict a research model, and also you need to go for a methodology section in which you need to talk about the population, sampling techniques, the questionnaire development, validation of the questionnaire, checking the reliability, and using the appropriate statistical tool, and the software used for analysis, and finally you do interpretation of those collected data, and finally you end up with the discussion of the findings pertaining to by citing various references. And also you will also talk about the conclusions and recommendation, which will be recommended to the managers concerned who make the decision making. So this is the the elements of the business research process. I think with this input from my end, hope you all can able to appreciate the business research process very clearly. I think, and also I'll be giving more in-depth inputs about each component in my oncoming sessions, which will give you more clarity in answering your exams. And you can also apply this learning to your real-time situation. I think I have given you a great clarity on the process of research. I think you'll be satisfied with my inputs through this session. Thank you so much.